It was a sweltering Friday when the teacher announced the field trip to the city's cultural center. Thaís was 9 years old and remained silent, but something inside her clicked. It wasn't common for her to leave the neighborhood with school, and the idea of visiting an important place made her stomach churn. At home, she spoke to her mother that same day, her eyes wide with excitement. Her mother sighed, but smiled. She said she would find a way, and she did. The next day, she washed her uniform by hand, straightened her sneakers with coconut soap, and set aside the little blue dress that was only worn on very special days. She also straightened her daughter's hair as carefully as she could, even with the old flat iron and her hands aching. "So, they don't talk nonsense," she murmured as she pulled at the strands with the brush. Thaís didn't quite understand what her mother was trying to avoid, but she knew that tone, the same one she used when she told her daughter not to talk back, even when they insult her. On the morning of departure, Thaís arrived early. Her classmates were all in groups, laughing, comparing the snacks they had brought. She stood close to the wall, holding her backpack with both hands. She had a mortadella sandwich, a small bottle of water, and a pack of Maria cookies that her mother had shared with a neighbor because she didn't have enough money to buy a whole pack. When the bus arrived, the teacher called out their names loudly. Thaís walked quickly, but when she climbed the steps of the bus, she already knew that there would be no middle seat. There was always the back seat left. She was used to going straight there, pretending that she preferred it, because asking someone to make room always ended in silence or jokes. She sat alone. A boy behind her asked loudly who had left the seat smelling like wet dog. They laughed. Thaís looked out the window, pretending not to hear, but her face heated up and her chest tightened. She wondered if the smell was hers, if she should have taken another shower, used more perfume. He wondered if his mother also felt the same way when she rode the bus with a bag full of bags, and no one wanted to sit next to her. The journey was long. The bus's air conditioning couldn't handle the heat, and the noise from the excited students only got louder. Thaís didn't say anything, but she paid attention to everything. When they passed large buildings or avenues with lots of cars, she wondered what it would be like to live in a place like that. Sometimes she imagined living in an apartment with glass windows, where no one shouted in the street at dawn. But she quickly stopped thinking. If she got too distracted, she ended up feeling a kind of shame she couldn't explain. When they arrived at the cultural center, everyone got off in a line. The teacher asked for silence and explained that it was forbidden to run or talk loudly inside the building. "Remember, we are representing the school," she said. Thaís noticed how the tone of her voice changed when she spoke to the security guards there. It became higher-pitched, more hurried, as if she wanted to appear different from what she was. Thaís found herself trying to imitate that voice in her mind, thinking that maybe one day she would need it too. Inside, the group was guided by a young woman in formal clothes who pointed to everything with a wooden stick. She explained about paintings, sculptures, and artists. Most of the students seemed bored, but Thaís listened attentively. She loved new words, difficult names, and foreign languages. When the guide talked about an African artist who used her own hair as material to create art, Thaís became excited. It was the first time she had seen someone her color being talked about in a positive way. She timidly raised her hand to ask a question, but the guide didn't notice. A boy in the group looked at her and said quietly, "What are you going to ask? If you can make a sculpture with your broom?" Some laughed. The teacher glared, but said nothing. Thaís slowly lowered her hand and bit the inside of her cheek. Inside, everything emptied. It seemed that even her desire to learn had been tripped up. After visiting the gallery, the group was allowed to have lunch in a small square behind the building. It was a beautiful space, full of cement benches and tall trees that provided shade. Thaís sat down near a flower bed, alone, as usual. She took her sandwich out of her lunchbox carefully, trying not to look clumsy. The Maria biscuit was a little soft, but she didn't care. She was hungry. While she ate, she watched from afar as her classmates were exchanging stickers or pushing each other, laughing. At one point, two girls approached her. She thought they were going to sit there too. She even felt a warm feeling in her chest. But one of them stopped, pointed at Thaís's hair, which was already starting to lose its shape with sweat and humidity, and said, "Look at that helmet falling apart." The two laughed and kept walking. Thaís didn't react. She didn't even cry. She just stood there, with the sandwich in her hand and her eyes fixed on the ground. It was as if, inside, some part of her had shut down so she wouldn't feel any more. She didn't tell anyone that day. Not her teacher, not her mother when she got home. She felt that somehow it was her fault, for having gone, for having been alone, for having raised her hand, for having thought she could ask something. That night, before going to sleep, she looked in the mirror in her closet and tried to fix her hair with her hands. She wanted to know why it didn't look like the other girls, why it seemed to grow upwards and never to the sides, why it was so much work, why it caused so much laughter. She didn't know how to answer. All she knew was that she wanted to disappear. She wondered if the whole world was like that, or if one day it would pass away. She wondered if there was a place where black children didn't feel wrong for existing, but it was hard to believe that, because, at that age, everything she knew taught her exactly the opposite. The worst part of that day was yet to come. After lunch, the students were taken to an interactive workshop where they could write their names in a foreign language with the help of monitors. It was supposed to be fun. Thaís got excited when she heard that they were going to use the Japanese alphabet. She remembered that she had seen something similar in an old comic book that her older brother kept. Her classmates ran to their tables. The line was long, but she remained quiet, waiting her turn. When her turn came, the monitor, a tall young man in a black shirt, looked at her and said in a mechanical voice, "Your name?" She answered quietly, "Thaís, with an H." He wrote something down on a piece of paper, smiled without even looking at her, and held out the brush. "You can try here," he said. Thaís tried to imitate the symbols that were in the example, but she was nervous. Her hand was shaking. The brush stained the paper. Everything was crooked. A boy who was waiting behind her said loudly, "She's not even good enough to copy. Are you going to clean that up with a broom later?" They laughed again. This time the teacher listened and called attention, but not firmly. She simply said, "No jokes, people. Let's respect each other." Thaís didn't answer, didn't move. Her face felt hot. Her heart was racing. Her hands were sweaty. She didn't know where to look. She tried to put the smudged paper in her backpack, but it tore on the way. That hurt more than it seemed it should. It was just a piece of paper with strange writing, but at that moment, it was all she had made of herself on that trip. And even that didn't work. For the rest of the workshop, she stayed in the corner, pretending to observe, but not participating. She thought about how sad her mother would be if she found out. She wondered if anyone would ever want to hear what she had to say, because until then, every time she tried, she was silenced by jokes, sidelong glances, or the simple silence of those pretending she didn't exist. The bus ride back was quieter, at least for Thaís. Her classmates continued laughing, talking loudly, swapping stories about the day as if nothing had happened. But for her, it was all too much. She sat on the same bench as before, in the back, now with her backpack on her lap as if it were a shield. She tried to doze off to forget, but her mind wouldn't stop. She remembered the girls' laughter, the boys' joke in the workshop, the way the teacher looked away every time someone poked or made fun of her. She even remembered her mother's voice saying, "Don't get involved." And that was what hurt the most, feeling like she couldn't tell anyone, that if she did, she might hear that she was exaggerating, or that she needed to be stronger. But how can you be strong at 9 years old When the whole world seems against you, and all you wanted was to sit with someone at snack time? When the bus stopped at school, Thaís got off last. The teacher thanked everyone for coming and said she was going to send the drawings to the Cultural Center's exhibition. Thaís didn't know if her smudged paper was there. She didn't think so. She dragged her feet back home. Her mother asked her how it was, and she said, "Nice." She took a shower, ate dinner quietly, and went straight to her room. But instead of sleeping, she sat on the bed staring at the ceiling. She thought about what it would be like if she had spoken out loud, responded to jokes, gotten the teacher's attention, but she couldn't imagine it. It seemed impossible. It was as if her body froze every time, as if she herself believed she couldn't take up too much space, that she had to go unnoticed. And then she thought, will I feel this way forever? It wasn't a child's question. It was a question from someone who, even at such a young age, already understood that the world could be cruel in a very silent way. The next day, when she arrived at school, Thaís noticed that the mood had changed. Some of her classmates were talking about the trip, giving exaggerated details, saying that they had seen famous artists or that they had won awards in the workshop. She listened to everything in silence. She was used to being a spectator in her own class. The teacher asked everyone to write an essay about what they had liked most. Thaís began to write, slowly. She thought about talking about the African artist, but the memory of the joke stopped her. She thought about talking about the Japanese alphabet, but the torn paper hurt, like an open wound. In the end, she wrote about the bus, about seeing the big buildings through the window, and even that she did out of fear. She thought that if she wrote too much, people would laugh. If she wrote too little, people would say she was stupid. She was stuck in this cruel middle ground, trying to find a tone that would please without drawing attention to herself. When she handed in her essay, she felt a knot in her stomach. She didn't know why. Maybe because, even though she tried to forget, the feeling wouldn't go away. It was like a layer that stuck to her and wouldn't come off. A little shame, a little anger, a little tired of feeling all this alone. During recess, she sat near the wall, as usual. The boys played ball. The girls chatted in a circle. Every now and then, someone would pass by and look at her with that look that mixed curiosity and contempt, as if she were a detail out of place. And there, sitting with her head resting against the warm wall, she wondered if she would ever be able to get out of that place inside her where everything hurt in silence. Because it wasn't just at school. It was on the street, at the market, even at the salon, where they said her hair was too hard to braid. It was everywhere someone said or looked at her as if she didn't belong, as if the mere fact of existing was already a nuisance. Months later, the teacher handed back some old essays that had been graded late. Thaís's was among them. When she picked up the paper, she saw "good" written in blue pen at the top of the page, with no comment whatsoever. No questions, no highlighted sentences, no look in return. For some of her classmates, the teacher had written, "Creative. I loved your description. You have a talent for writing." But for Thaís, it was just that, good. As if it had been written by someone invisible. And that hurt in a strange way. Because it wasn't a bad grade. It wasn't a punishment. It was worse. It was the bare minimum. The shallow minimum. Enough to not draw attention, neither up nor down. And Thaís felt that maybe that was what they always expected of her. That she would exist in the back of the room, do the minimum, not bother anyone, not show herself too much. That her presence would go unnoticed, just so that no one would have to deal with her for real. It was that same day that she heard the word meritocracy for the first time. One of the boys repeated what his father used to say at home: "If you want to succeed, just try hard." Those who complain are those who didn't try hard. And the others agreed. They laughed. Thaís didn't say anything. But that kept going through her head for a long time. She thought about her mother leaving home before sunrise to catch 2 buses to work, about her father, who worked as a bricklayer, about her sister, who studied at night with dark circles under her eyes. And she wondered, did no one there really try hard? Did everything really depend on that? Because she herself woke up early, studied, did her homework, and secretly read the books from the library because she was embarrassed to ask for help. And yet it seemed like there was an invisible barrier between her and the rest of the class. A wall that she didn't know who had built, but that she had to pretend not to see every day. Time passed, and Thaís learned to keep quiet before anyone made fun of her. She started to avoid raising her hand, even when she knew the answer. When the teacher called for reading, she read quickly and without looking up. When they came to do group work, she would gather everything by herself so no one would say she was getting in the way. And inside, she was getting tougher. Not out of anger, out of defense, as if creating a shell was the only way to continue. But even so, sometimes she would escape. Sometimes she felt that urge to participate, to show that she knew too, that she also had something to say. Like that afternoon when a substitute teacher asked by accident who there spoke another language. No one answered, but she raised her hand, almost without thinking. She said that her mother knew a little French and taught her a few words at home. The teacher smiled, but a classmate behind her muttered, "French from the favelas?" And the class burst out laughing. That night, Thaís didn't say much at dinner. Her mother asked if she was sick. She only said she was tired. But the truth is that she wanted to understand why it hurt so much. It wasn't just the joke. It was the way the class laughed, how the teacher's eyes looked in another direction, how the teacher, even with good intentions, didn't know what to do. It was as if, in every corner of her life, someone was ready to remind her of her place. And she didn't even know what that place was. She only knew that she didn't want to be there. Not like that. That same week, she wrote in her notebook, "When I grow up, I'm going to speak every language in the world. Then I want to see people laugh at me." It was the first time she had written something just for herself. She hid the notebook under her mattress, afraid that someone would find it. But that sentence stayed, like a seed that, even without water, refused to die. She grew up with this phrase in her heart, even without knowing exactly how she would make it happen. There were no language courses in the neighborhood. The public school offered basic English, but there were barely any teachers. Even so, Thaís copied words from packaging, watched cartoons dubbed with subtitles, listened to songs with a dictionary by her side. When the school library received an old Spanish conversation book, she asked to borrow it until the end of the semester. She read the phrases quietly in her backyard, practicing her pronunciation by herself, trying not to make mistakes. At first, the neighbors laughed. They said she spoke like something from a Mexican soap opera. But she kept going, because every time she heard a new word, she felt like she was piling stones on a wall that separated her from the jokes. It was the first time she felt like she had some kind of weapon, no matter how small, against the silence that had been imposed on her since childhood. In high school, she got a partial scholarship to a language course at the local church. She learned French with a volunteer teacher who noticed her dedication and donated a used dictionary. Later, Thaís cleaned the schoolroom on Saturdays in exchange for the classes. She swept many floors and scrubbed many bathrooms so she could continue learning. When she passed the entrance exam for linguistics at USP, her father cried. Her mother apologized for not being able to buy new clothes for the first day. She wore the same blue dress from the field trip, now tighter. She entered the classroom, scared, embarrassed, but certain that she had not gotten there by chance. She remembered the child who kept the torn papers and listened in silence to the insults. She remembered the sweaty hands, the choked voice, the eyes that never met hers. And she thought, maybe now someone will listen to me. But deep down, she knew that she would still have to prove herself more than the others. But this time, she was ready. Things weren't much easier at college. She was one of the few black students on the course, and the only one in the class who lived in the outskirts. Her classmates talked about international travel, exchange programs, and bibliographies in German. Thaís often pretended to understand everything, but she studied in secret on public transportation, writing down words she didn't know to research later. She worked in the morning at a small grocery store and at night did a volunteer internship at an NGO that helped immigrants. It was there that she learned Dutch. One of the ED students, a man from Amsterdam, noticed her effort and started bringing newspapers, pamphlets, and audio files for her to practice. When he returned to Europe, he left her a handwritten note. "You speak with your eyes. Keep going." She kept it like a secret trophy, something that no one at college knew about, but that, to her, was worth more than any high grade. It was as if, for the first time, someone had seen who she was beyond her tests and attendance. Despite all her efforts, when she graduated, the doors didn't open as she had hoped. Thaís sent out dozens of resumes. She interviewed at companies that praised her language skills, but later said that the profile didn't fit. She tried for positions in international hotel departments, but was always called for operational roles. When she started working at the Imperial Palace Hotel as a cleaner, she promised herself that it would only be for a short time. But the months turned into years, 6, to be exact. During all that time, she continued studying, sending emails, offering to help with internal translations, and participating in training courses that didn't require her presence. And even so, it was as if she wore an invisible cloak. Whenever she tried to show who she was, she received a sideways look or a formal silence, as if the cleaning uniform nullified everything she knew. And, deep down, that was exactly what they were doing, pretending she didn't exist. The day of the call was like so many others. Thaís was on her knees, cleaning the floor of the main lobby, when her cell phone shook in her pocket. She wasn't supposed to answer it. It was a rule. Even more so there, where everything seemed to remind her that she belonged on the ground. But she recognized the number. It was from the University of Amsterdam. She took a deep breath and hid behind one of the marble columns. She answered carefully, her voice low, her hand sweaty. When she heard the Dutchman on the other end of the line, she answered. In the same language, Professor Vandermeer was talking about the international master's degree process, asking for documents. It was a real chance. She answered firmly, but her heart was racing. Suddenly, she felt someone watching her. She looked up and saw Ricardo Montero, the owner of the hotel chain, standing there, staring at her. Next to him, Sonia, the manager, was frowning. Thaís hung up immediately. She thought she was going to be fired. "Oliveira, in my office now," was all she heard. The walk to the basement was one of the longest in her life. Her mind was racing. She tried to remember if she had cleaned every corner, if she had forgotten any details, if this was the end. When she entered the manager's office, she heard the scolding like so many others. No cell phone, no public conversation. And speaking of, what was that? French? Arabic? Dutch, she answered without thinking, and regretted it immediately. Sonia's face hardened. Thaís heard the punishment coming coldly. Shifts in the convention center bathrooms. It was the classic punishment. Twice as much work, no recognition. That night, she cried in secret, looking at the certificates that decorated the wall of her small room, as if the memory of everything she had accomplished only served to increase the pain of not being seen. The worst of all was not the punishment. It was the feeling that, no matter what she did, they would not let her leave the place where they had decided she belonged. But the next day, the improbable happened. Thaís was called to the HR department and, from there, taken to the top floor. When she entered Ricardo Montero's office, her heart almost stopped. She thought about being fired, reprimanded, anything except what she heard. The businessman had requested her resume, read every detail, seen every language. "Why has someone like you been cleaning my hallways for 6 years?" he asked. Thaís swallowed hard. She talked about the promotion attempts, the ignored emails, the unexplained rejections. She talked about the manager Sonia, the director Medeiros, the constant rejections. Montero didn't answer right away. He just looked at her for a few long seconds, in silence. Then he made the invitation. He wanted her to coordinate the communications for the international conference that would start the next day. He needed someone fluent in Dutch and Mandarin. Thaís didn't believe him. She thought he was joking, but he repeated it. Salary of 20,000 a week. Total access. Complete trust. For the first time in a long time, someone saw her. In the days that followed, she showed everything she knew. She corrected poorly made translations, mediated conversations with Chinese businessmen, helped to unlock deals that seemed to be stalled by simple cultural differences. And in the process, she discovered what she should never have had to prove, that she was capable, prepared, brilliant. But she also discovered an entire system of exclusion. Overpriced. Translations. Documents signed by the director's niece, who didn't even speak Mandarin. Qualified candidates like her were systematically rejected. With the help of Julia, a new HR analyst, she gathered evidence. They presented everything to Montero. And on a tense morning, in front of a room full of managers and investors, he exposed the truth. He fired Medeiros for cause. He suspended Sonia. He announced the creation of a diversity program. And he gave Thaís the position of Global Director of BAI, Internal Communications. When she walked on stage, with her new badge hanging around her neck, she didn't have to say much. All he had to do was look at the back of the room, where the cleaning ladies were applauding with tears in their eyes. That night, alone in her new office on the 32nd floor, Thaís sat in front of the window and looked out at the entire illuminated city. Her badge hung brightly next to her blazer. She reached carefully into her pocket and took out an old piece of paper, folded many times, yellowed with age, the sentence she had written when she was 9 years old, after yet another day of silence and humiliation. "When I grow up, I will speak all the languages in the world." She read it quietly, as if she were speaking to the child she had been. For a few seconds, she let it all come to her. The laughter, the averted glances, the smell of the bus, the half-soft Maria biscuit, her hair straightened with pain, the writing workshop that ended in a joke, the back seat, the years of invisibility. And then, the Dutchman on the phone, the surprise in her boss's eyes, the folder with her resume open, the room full of faces that were finally listening to her. She cried, but it wasn't sadness. It was the kind of crying that cleansed, that made space. There was no moral lesson, no happy ending. But there was something bigger, a child who survived alone, and who now, as an adult, made sure that no other had to go through the same thing, neither silently nor invisible.